I'm Dario Bart with the Global Post Confederation. I'm here today with Marlene Boersch, co-founder and managing partner of Mercantile Consulting Venture. And Marlene is a well-known figure in post-industry circles. She is a frequent speaker at Global Post Confederation events. And in fact, she will be doing us the honor of participating as our special guest analyst on the Dry P Outlook session at Pulses 2.0 at the end of the month. Marlene, thank you for joining me today.
I'm very pleased to do so.
Thanks. Well, to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal and professional backgrounds, and how it is that you became involved with the agriculture sector.
Well, it actually goes back to my childhood because I was born onto a farm in Germany that had been in our family for many generations. And I had four brothers, so I wasn't going to take over the farm in Germany, but I was still interested in agriculture. I suppose it's in my blood. So I went on to study agriculture and went to Canada and basically to study there for a year, but I quite liked it. And I ended up taking a master's degree in agricultural economics in Canada. To the chagrin of my mother, I should add, I fell in love with the prairies and I guess followed my inclination to stay on the agriculture side. And while I was studying, I actually met Dr. Slinkard. I don't know if you're familiar with the name, but he was, I would say, the godfather of pulses in Western Canada because he was the plant breeder who developed layered lentil, for example, Eston lentils. I was at the university in the late 70s, early 80s in Saskatchewan. I actually got to know him fairly well. I went along early on while I was writing my thesis with some of the very early pulse meetings in Laird, Saskatchewan, for example. And I guess that's where I got my taste on the pulse side very early on. I went on from there, as I said, stayed in Canada and got hired by Cargill Grain in Winnipeg. First on the producer marketing side, which had to do with pricing cash crops. And then I got to go into the trading room and I traded wheat and rye, actually. I went on to Excan Grain. I don't know if some people still remember Excan Grain. At the time, it was the biggest procurer of farm commodities on the prairies because of all the cooperatives that we had at the time. And because of my eye on pulses, and you have to remember that pulses were only a few thousand acres big in the late 70s. But I started taking over the trading of pulses at Excan Grain, and I was there for about 10 years. So that culminated with trading of feed peas when the volumes became larger and so on. I went on to Burdex Canada as executive vice president, and then later on in 2003, we formed Mercantile Consulting Venture with a former colleague from Cargill. That's Anthony Paul Temple, and he used to be my boss at Cargill a long time ago. But he had a lot of experience in the UK, Canada, South America. He lived in Brazil for 11 years. So he brings a lot of experience on the canola and oilseed side, and we combined that with mine on wheat and pulses and so on. And, 17 years ago now, we formed Mercantile Consulting Venture.
Well, that's very interesting. Just want to go back to a couple of things that I think were particularly interesting. If you could tell us what part of Germany your family is from originally, and also the decision to move to Canada. Tell us about how that came about, how you decided on your studies in Canada.
I come from Cologne, so a lot of people will recognize Cologne because of Anuga. You know, a lot of the pulse traders go there. So we're just south of Cologne. In fact, when you climb onto the Cologne Cathedral, you can just kind of recognize our farm. My father actually I think it was in 1976, he had a love of travel. And he had been in Asia early on, but that wasn't a very in thing to do yet. But he had also traveled to North America and to Canada, and he had actually bought some farmland in Saskatchewan. And that was kind of the impetus and the interest in Canada. He was very intrigued by farming here. And So had developed some friendships with people here, and we did a little bit of an exchange between myself and the daughter of the people he bought the farmland from, actually. And that was the initial kind of exposure. So while I was here, in my last year of high school, I actually explored the universities a little bit. And I thought it would be a cool idea to go to an English-speaking country, learn the language, and then go on. And that's how I ended up in Canada, actually. I pursued that idea of studying here for a year. And then I decided I'd finish my bachelor degree. Then I got a scholarship. And so I always stayed. Had an offer by Cargill Grain upon graduation. And I must say, I've never regretted it. Agriculture is a big part of Western Canada. So you really feel part of the industry and the developments here. And I have actually two brothers that live here now as well. I have two brothers in Germany and two brothers in Canada. So we have kind of branched out and built a North American branch of the family.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Mercantile Consulting Venture. Tell me about the early days and the idea behind forming it and how the company has grown over the years.
Well, the idea came from a meeting with Tony Temple, and I think in 2002. I had been trading pulses for over 20 years, and it had been a very exciting enterprise. And again, you know, I was there from the very early days on, and initially it involved developing markets in Northern Europe, which was very close to my roots, into the Mediterranean for lentils, peas primarily, and canary seed. And then South America. So South America is always very dear to my heart. I was, I think, the first ship of bulk lentils into Colombia, for example. And Asia came later on, and I found the risks in trading much larger volumes into Asia were very, very high. And I was running a smaller company called Vertex Canada at the time. And at the same time, one deficit that became more and more obvious is that the market intelligence that we do have and use on pulses is actually very inferior, I would say. It's not very well developed. So we had the idea of working on projects. That's when I met with Tony, working on market intelligence and on the communication thereof. And so we started off Mercantile Consulting, Tony Temple and I. And really the idea was to work more with commercial companies, but we quickly expanded into the farming side as well, in that we developed a market communication letter and regular conference calls with farm groups. And the reason that came about is that I had purchased pulses on the prairies for so long. There were a number of what were called marketing clubs at the time that would sell pooled product to me. And they were very much into we had always exchanged data and communication fairly extensively. And so they approached me if I would still talk to them about the markets and give them ideas where the markets were heading. And so that side developed in an unanticipated way. And I still very, very much enjoy that because, again, it's very close to my roots on the farm side. So we give advice on when to sell, where prices are moving, what the balance sheets are telling us, what the developments are in the various markets. So we do three things. Basically, we do what I call the commercial market intelligence, which includes private label contracts, where we do specific analysis and data for specific companies that are not open to the public. We do the farm communication, our weekly market commentaries and discussions thereof. And we do project work, and that involves things like many years ago, we did an early look at Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan as they were developing their production and the markets. We have been working with clients in Europe, and here I should add that we do deal with grains and oilseeds as well as with pulses. And I find that very beneficial because what's happening on the production side in grains and oilseeds greatly influences how we develop our pulse acres and so on. So we deal, for example, with clients like Warburton's. People in the wheat market will be familiar with them in the UK, Axel Toft in Denmark, Cefetra in the Netherlands. We dealt with the Grain Licensing Authority in Australia for a long time until they were dismantled. We have some clients in Colombia. So it's kind of a portfolio that kind of feeds on each other and, complements some of the intelligence we gather in certain sectors for others. And I must say it's been 17 years and I have greatly enjoyed it and look forward for more to come because there are big changes in the markets as we see them now.
Well, tell us a little bit about the future plans for Mercantile Consulting Ventures. Anything in the works?
I must say that project work, for example, has slowed down a little bit for the moment. I think that's somewhat COVID related and it will certainly come back because, as I said, there are a lot of new developments on the pulse side with respect to fractioning. There are exciting things happening on the production side because of environmental aspects and so on. We have a couple of very young people working with us. Mitch Rosnick, who has just finished his PhD, and Michael Wilton, who just finished a master's in ag economics. And I find that they're bringing a lot of new technology with them, particularly on the communication side and the way to handle databases, for example, and also on the analysis side. So as we bring them more into the company, teach them a little bit about market intelligence. We look forward on new approaches to some of the project work. And, as I said, with changes on the processing side, we need to have more detailed looks at the demand side at a different level. And that will require a little bit of a different skill set. And that will then be complemented with some of the experience that Tony and I bring in the commodity markets. And really, I think that's what sets us apart on the consulting side, is that we can kind of match some of these technical skills with the hands-on knowledge in marketing and market development that Tony and I bring. So I think the future looks challenging and very, very interesting for us.
And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what would you say are the biggest challenges to providing analysis of pulse markets?
Without question, some of the biggest challenges is data. We oftentimes make do with derived data, for example. There are very few very good databases available. So when I think about challenges on a day-to-day basis, it's mostly really data related. We have good relationships in various markets, though, from the trading side, and we often get opinions and in-house data. But I very much, when I compare it to what we do on the grains and oilseed side, I look forward to sometimes having a more solid base actually for some of the analyses. And I should, when we look at some of the studies we have done, the really good ones really do depend on good data. We have done some lost earnings analysis, for example, on the Canadian side because of transportation difficulties. A value assessment of pulses from gate to plate. And again, we use a lot of derived data instead of direct data. I think we can come up with some better decision tools when we look a little more in depth, really on the pulse side as well, as the market matures much more from some of the infant sides that I was used to in the 80s and 90s.
Well, how about the pandemic? We're all living with this COVID-19 and it's changing the way we work. Has it affected your job in any way?
I do miss some of the personal contact that one normally has, going to some of the conventions or going to direct client meetings. I find coordination between our team is a little more challenging because there has been a lot of work done at home. And certainly technology again helps here. We do a lot of Skyping and or Zoom meetings. But again, I do miss the direct contact, and I sometimes find the coordination challenging. There are also changes on the market side. So, we have to be very much on our toes to follow changes in demand. And again, difficulties in actually measuring those statistically and trying to ascertain, for example, if the changes are longer term or if it's just a blip in demand, certainly is a challenge when people are trying to get ready actually in terms of the trading side. So quantifying some of the changes and having more timely data, would be very, very welcome. When I look at the Canadian side, for example, it baffles me that when we look at Stats Canada, why in today's day and age, it takes us 3 months to come up with the final export data. Now we follow it, through some other channels, but it would be helpful if we can improve on some of those things, certainly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the crops this year, and specifically the pea crop, since you'll be the analyst on the panel in Pulses 2.0. So I was looking at the numbers Agricultural Canada put out. They've got the pea crop at 4.25 million metric tons. How do you feel about that estimate, and how do you see the market outlook for 2020-21?
Well, the P estimate clearly is too small, and indeed, Stats Canada came out with the first production estimate, a full production estimate on Monday, and they were just a smidgen below 5 million tons. So it's a major change in their numbers. Our own numbers, we had started off with 4.3 to 4.4 million tons because we do data on all of the commodities in-house. Which was a little bit higher. We had some differences in acreages there. And our current estimate, I should add, is 4.75 million tons. And I think our yield data is a bit different. We see, particularly from the further northern areas, we see some varying yields, not consistently very, very high. So I think we're using a somewhat different yield number and have settled on the 4.75 million tons. When we go to, I think you call it Pulse 2.0, we will also elaborate a little more on production by type. And because we have changes in acreage there as well, and increase in production on yellow peas is actually not as high as it might seem. I think we're at 4%. Because we had some switch into green pea acres as well. So certainly for a lot of the customers of peas, as well as the shipper, it will be important to look at some of the breakdown when we go to 2.0. I see the demand developing quite well. We have a very good vessel lineup actually for August, first half September at the West Coast in Canada for shipment. Most of these shipments will be for China. Which has certainly been our go-to volume destination. But there's also a vessel for Cuba in there. And so I think it's a very good start for the year, because if you take volume off early in the trading season, that gives us a better footing actually in the later half of the crop year. So I think we are looking at a good year. Our stock estimate, ending stocks, in spite of the big production at the moment, is around 400,000 tons. And again, I think it will be interesting to watch the 2.0 edition of the GPC discussion on peas, because certainly there's some updates, that will be made on production in Canada, the Black Sea countries, and probably some updates on demand as well. So it's going to be an interesting session, I think.
Interesting campaign too, with India sitting this one out on yellow peas, right? They've got their pea import quota, but they've excluded yellow peas specifically.
I have next to no demand from India in our balance sheet for peas, for the Canadian peas. But we project very good demand from China because peas are also working into the feed sector. And specifically, agri-feed has been very good to us. And China carries a political risk within Canada, as you well know. But I think it's a commodity that is harder to replace from other origins. So as they did in the past year, we anticipate them to continue buying from us in this new crop year as well.
Let's switch to the a big topic, which is the use of pulse ingredients, right? And peas definitely have, especially yellow peas, are kind of the preferred pulse crop in this regard. And we're seeing a lot of processing capacity opening up in the Western prairies. How do you see this possibly changing the pulse industry in Canada?
Well, the highest profile of these certainly is Roquette, and the building is coming along very nicely. They say or assure us that they will be operational this year, so that's very welcome. We have the Merit plant and some smaller ones in Western Canada. So if you look at a 5-year horizon, we basically went from zero use for fractioning to this year, we are anticipating a domestic demand of around 900,000 tons, and that includes feed, seed, our small food use in Canada, and the fractioning side. I would say about half of that is for fractioning. So that certainly becomes a sizable portion of our balance sheet, and you know, to some degree will compete with the export demand. And we only see that growing going forward. So very welcome development, and we will see, you know, how it develops. The forecast and the outlook for the use of pulses in these operations is certainly very good. I think we will also see other commodities being used. I know that people are looking at faba bean, for example, and that's a crop we can grow very well here as well because of the higher protein content. That might be very interesting ingredient for that as well. So I think there are more things to come, and it rounds out our balance sheet very nicely. It makes us a little less vulnerable to the vagrancies of the export market, you know, as an almost exclusive use for our peas. So very welcome development, and I think we will see more of that.
And Marlene, you spoke a little bit of Pulses 2.0. You kind of teased it a little bit. What are some of the questions you might have for the panelists at the Global Pea Outlook session?
Well, certainly before we go into the Outlook session, we'll refresh a lot of the numbers. And I think, you know, certainly starting on the production side, the last session was in July. So we know an awful lot more about the Canadian crop, which is very important, as we just alluded to. We'll also update certainly the Black Sea crops, and we'll also refresh the demand outlook. What's new on the tariff sides? What are the effects of COVID? Are they long-term or not? What are the ending stocks projections, which are very important for price developments and price expectations? And then are there any changes to the trade matrix as we saw it then? Who trades with whom, who will buy from whom? And again, the price developments. So trade developments, you know, any trade talk is always very welcome. There will be different opinions, I hope. So we'll develop a little bit of a discussion around some of these aspects. But it will certainly be an updated version of what we did in July, you know, with some of the things that we learned since about this year's crop year.
Great. And Marlene, just in closing, anything else you would like to share with GPC members? No, just my general sense of the state of the industry and the trade.
And I think the pulse industry and the pulse trade is in a little bit of a sweet spot with respect to increased demand for the traditional use. We just discussed some of the new demand possibilities and hope that they will develop well going forward. There's certainly new investment money coming into our industry, which is very welcome. I think we're very well positioned with some of the environmental concerns that have developed around agricultural production and that are also bothering the consumer. So it's fueling the positive sentiment of consumers towards our products. For example, EU regulation is becoming difficult for the oilseed side. I think it will be much kinder to the pulse side. In fact, I think they're going to be supporting some of the pulse production side. I think longer term, that's very positive. And if you look at the big picture, we're talking about 8 billion people by 2023, 9 billion people by, I think the latest estimates are by 2037. So I think we can meet the demand for food. It remains a challenge, but we can certainly hope to be a big factor in that growth on the pulse side because of some of these positive perceptions. And I think the pulse industry and trade have been doing the right thing in being open and communicative with each other. I think GPC has certainly helped set the stage there. I think it's a wonderful development to foster discussion and the exchange of data and ideas. I think that's extremely positive in an environment where we see a bit of a retrenchment from the open trade side, which, I should have mentioned earlier, one of the big threats is just that the open trade is being disrupted. Part of our growth history over the last 20 years has been the ability to trade with each other fairly openly. So, I hope what you're doing at GPC is certainly helping that sentiment, and it's going to be very positive. And there's also, the idea that we are getting a lot of, it's my observation that we're getting a lot of younger people involved. And that's positive. It brings ideas, it brings energy, and it will help us flourish and grow using, the very positive foundations that we are finding ourselves with right now. So it's interesting for me because when I started in the 80s on the pulse side, it was a very, very small industry. It was very much a niche market. It certainly has developed from there, and I feel we are on a new plateau where we can use as a springboard for even bigger and better things to come. So I look forward to that.
It's good to have optimism in this time.
I think we need that at this time. Yeah.
Yes, we do. Thanks so much, Marlene, and we're all very much looking forward to your participation in Pulses 2.0. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to 2.0 as well. Thank you.